Fake Wife, Real Feelings, a novel by Joan Savage. Chapter 1. The Billionaire's Proposal. The morning Sophia Bennett's life changed forever. She was standing in the rain outside Blackwood Tower with a broken umbrella, a coffee stain on her white blouse, and exactly $14 in her checking account. She told herself it was fine. She told herself this every morning. It was never fine. The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor, and Sophia stepped into the glass and steel world of Blackwood Technologies with her shoes squelching softly against the marble. She smiled at the security desk, smoothed her damp hair, and lifted her chin the way her mother had always taught her. Like you belong everywhere, sweetheart, even when you feel like you belong nowhere. She had worked for Ethan Blackwood for 2 years, 2 years of 6 a.m. emails, canceled lunches, and conference calls that bled past midnight. 2 years of anticipating his needs before he voiced them, of shielding him from the world and from himself, and of never, not once, receiving anything warmer than a curt nod in return. She didn't mind. That was the lie she had perfected. "Miss Bennett?" Marcus, the head of security, lowered his voice as she passed. "He's already in. And he's—" Marcus tilted his head with a particular expression that meant storm warning. Take cover. "Got it." She picked up her pace. Ethan Blackwood was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window when she pushed open his office door. His back to her, a phone pressed to his ear, his posture rigid as iron. He was in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent, and the Manhattan skyline spread out behind him like a painting commissioned specifically for his benefit. He didn't acknowledge her entrance. He never did. She set his coffee, black, no sugar, temperature checked, on the corner of his desk, placed his morning briefing beside it, and was already moving toward the door when his voice stopped her. "Sit down, Sophia." She turned. He was still facing the window, phone now lowered to his side. Her name, not Miss Bennett. That was unusual enough to root her in place. "Mr. Blackwood?" "I said, sit down." He turned then, and she saw it. The thing that Marcus's expression had been warning her about. It wasn't rage. Ethan Blackwood in a rage was actually manageable, almost predictable. This was something else entirely. Something careful and contained and almost uncertain. That scared her far more. She sat. He studied her for a long moment with those gray eyes that gave nothing away, the ones that had unnerved her completely when she first took the job and now merely made her feel like she was being scanned by expensive machinery. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to hear the entire proposition before you respond." "Okay." Her hands were folded in her lap. She kept her expression neutral. "The Meridian merger is in trouble." He moved to his desk, braced both hands against the edge. The Wall Street Journal was open on his screen, and even from her chair, she could read the headline, "Blackwood's Personal Life Called into Question as Meridian Deal Hangs in Balance." The board has concerns. The investors have concerns. Apparently, a man who has been photographed with 6 different women in the last 18 months does not inspire confidence when he's asking them to trust him with a $12 billion acquisition. "I'm aware of the coverage," she said carefully. Victoria Crane has been feeding stories to the press. His jaw tightened. She wants the deal to fall apart. If Meridian pulls out, the stock drops, and she and her coalition of unhappy shareholders make a move for the board. Sophia knew the name. Victoria Crane, former girlfriend, current thorn, perpetually elegant and perpetually ruthless. She said nothing. "I need to demonstrate stability," Ethan said. "Personal stability. The kind that reassures a room full of old money investors who still believe a man's character is measured by his domestic arrangements." The faintest trace of contempt crossed his face. "Which means, I need a wife." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Sophia waited for the rest. There was always a rest. Not a real one. he said, watching her. A temporary arrangement. A contract marriage, 6 months, for the duration of the merger negotiations and the initial integration period. Public appearances, events, travel when required. Full domestic cohabitation for the sake of appearances, when required. At the end of the 6 months, we announce a mutual, amicable separation, and you walk away with a settlement that I think you'll find significantly addresses your current, he paused, almost delicately, financial situation. The silence was so complete that she could hear the rain against the windows 42 floors up. You looked at my financial records, she said. I look at everything. She wanted to be angry about that. She filed the feeling away for later. Why me? Something shifted in his expression, slight as the movement of shadows. Because you're already under a non-disclosure agreement. Because I trust your discretion more than I trust anyone else's. Because you know my schedule, my habits, my preferences, and my public profile well enough to make this convincing. He straightened. And because I suspect, Sophia, that you need this as much as I do. That landed harder than it should have. She thought about the eviction notice folded in her bag. Harder than it should have. About her mother's hospital bills, the ones she'd been paying in small increments for 18 months, the ones that never seemed to get smaller. About the credit card she'd maxed out on groceries last week. She thought about all the mornings she'd told herself it's fine when it was so comprehensively not fine. How much? She asked. He named a number. She kept her face completely still. It was the most impressive acting she'd ever done in her life. What are the terms? She said. And for the first time in 2 years of working for Ethan Blackwood, she saw something move across his face that might, in a different light, in a different man, have been relief. Chapter 2. The Contract. The contract was 47 pages long. The contract. Sophia sat in the leather chair across from Ethan's personal attorney, a dry-eyed woman named Helena Voss, who had the energy of someone who had witnessed every possible variety of human desperation and found it all equally unremarkable, and she read every single page. Ethan stood by the window again. It seemed to be his preferred location for difficult conversations. The glass between him and the city below, like a barrier he'd constructed on purpose. Article 4.2. The parties agree to maintain the appearance of a genuine marital relationship in all public settings, including but not limited to press events, investor gatherings, family occasions, and social engagements. Article 7.1. The parties agree to share primary residence at Blackwood Tower Penthouse, 432 Park Avenue, for the duration of the agreement. Each party shall maintain separate sleeping quarters. Sophia paused on that one. Separate sleeping, something about seeing it written so plainly. Separate sleeping quarters made the whole thing feel suddenly, absurdly real. Article 12.3. Neither party shall develop or act upon romantic feelings for the other. Should either party believe such feelings are developing, they are obligated to disclose this to the other party immediately, at which point renegotiation or early termination may be considered. She almost laughed. Article 12.3. As if feelings were a liability to be managed, a risk factor to be disclosed, like a pre-existing condition on an insurance form. Miss Bennett, Helena said, do you have questions? The public story, Sophia said, keeping her voice even. What are we telling people? A private relationship, Ethan said from the window. We've been involved for the past 8 months. We kept it quiet out of professional discretion. The marriage was quick. A private ceremony in Vermont last weekend. It fits the timeline. A private ceremony. It explains why nothing has been photographed. My friends will know it's not true. Your friends sign amended N. Diaz this afternoon. He said it simply, as if this were obvious, as if the signing of legal documents by her social circle were a completely standard Tuesday. Anyone you're concerned about, give Helena the names. She thought of her best friend Dana, who would, Sophia was quite sure, immediately demand a full accounting and then probably shriek loud enough to be heard from New Jersey. I'll need to tell one person the truth. Ethan turned. No. She won't. No exceptions. The integrity of this arrangement depends on its credibility, and its credibility depends on zero leaks. His voice was flat and final, the voice he used in boardrooms when a decision had been made, and dissent was a formality he had no patience for. If that's a problem, it's not, Sophia said quietly. She turned back to the contract. 47 pages. She turned back her life for the next 6 months, written in legal language and organized into subsections. She signed on page 47 and tried not to notice that her hand was trembling. What she did not tell Ethan, because he did not ask, and because she had learned in 2 years of working for him that vulnerability was a currency she could not afford in his presence, was why the money mattered so much. Her mother, Ellen Bennett, had been diagnosed with a degenerative spinal condition 18 months ago. The surgery that could significantly improve her quality of life cost $140,000 after insurance. Sophia had been slowly, desperately trying to bridge that gap for a year and a half, selling everything that could be sold, picking up freelance work at midnight, eating pasta 4 nights a week. The number Ethan had offered was $250,000. It was enough. It was more than enough. $50,000. It was the difference between her mother spending the rest of her life in pain and her mother being able to walk without a cane by Christmas. Sophia stared at the signed contract in Helena's manicured hands and thought, I would do far more than this for her. She would pretend to love the most difficult man in Manhattan for 6 months. She would wear his ring and attend his events and sleep in a separate room in his penthouse and smile for the cameras. She could do this? She was the woman who told herself it's fine every morning. She was very good at pretending. Ethan waited until Helena left before he spoke again. We go public Friday, he said. The Meridian Board has a gala at the Metropolitan Museum. We'll attend as a couple. I need you to... I know how to behave at a gala, Mr. Blackwood. A pause. Ethan, he said. She looked up. In public, and here, effective immediately. It's Ethan. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't read. It's Ethan. We need to be convincing. She nodded. Ethan. His name felt strange in her mouth. In 2 years, she had never once used it. There are some details we'll need to coordinate, he continued, moving to his desk with the brisk efficiency of a man who was most comfortable when everything could be converted into a task list. Preferences I'll need to know. Backstory we'll need to align on. Family. He paused fractionally on that last word. I'll need to know about your family. My mother, she said. She lives in Hoboken. She has limited mobility. She's the only family I have. He looked at her for a moment, and she had the unsettling sense that he was calculating something, though what, she couldn't say. She'll be taken care of, he said. That's not a renegotiation, it's just, that's included. She didn't trust herself to speak for a second. Thank you, she managed. He nodded once and returned to his papers. Conversation over. Transaction complete. To his papers. She gathered her things and stood and was almost to the door when he said, quietly, to her back, I know this isn't what either of us would choose, Sophia. I want you to know that I'm aware of that. She stood very still, with her hand on the doorframe. It's fine, she said. And she almost believed it. Chapter 3. Moving into the penthouse. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building on Park Avenue that had been profiled in Architectural Digest twice and looked, in Sophia's opinion, like the kind of place where emotions went to die surrounded by very beautiful furniture. She arrived on a Sunday with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and the potted succulent she'd had for 3 years and refused to leave behind. The building's concierge, a man named Philip, who clearly had been briefed and who treated her with the careful deference of someone who understood that the rules had changed, escorted her up in a private elevator. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Sophia had been here before, several times, to drop off documents or coordinate weekend logistics. She had never lingered. Now, standing in the entryway with her suitcases and her succulent, she took it in properly. It was extraordinary. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, the whole of Manhattan glittering below. Ceilings somewhere near 15 feet. Walls in pale gray and warm ivory, furnished with the kind of spare, deliberate elegance that communicated money not by showing everything, but by showing only the perfect things. A piano that she suspected had never been played, art that she recognized, a small Basquiat, a framed Hockney photograph, a bronze sculpture near the staircase that she was fairly certain was worth more than her childhood home. And there, leaning in the doorway of what she would later learn was his home office, arms crossed, watching her take it all in with an expression of perfectly calibrated neutrality. Ethan. He'd changed from his work clothes, dark jeans, a charcoal sweater. She had never seen him in anything other than a suit, and the adjustment required by her brain was more significant than seemed reasonable. "Your room is the second on the right," he said. "My housekeeper, Maria, has been informed of the arrangement. She has signed an additional NDA." A pause. "She also made lasagna." Sophia blinked. "Maria made lasagna. She does it when she's pleased about something." He pushed off the doorframe. "She seems to think this is good news." Sophia thought about Article 12.3 and decided not to analyze the warmth she felt at the idea of someone in this glass tower being pleased. "That's kind of her," she said. "I'll show you the kitchen." He gave her the tour with the efficiency of a man who had learned to walk people through spaces quickly. The kitchen, massive, state-of-the-art, and based on the evidence, almost entirely unused by him. The living areas, the roof terrace with its garden that Maria tended and Ethan never visited, the gym, the library. The library made Sophia pause. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, a rolling ladder, afternoon light pooling on worn spines. "You read?" she asked, and then felt immediately foolish, because obviously he read there was a whole library. Some. He watched her move along the shelves with something that might have been curiosity. "You?" "Everything I can get my hands on." She touched the spine of a collection of Chekhov short stories. "This is a first edition." "Yes." "You leave first editions on open shelves?" "Books are meant to be read, not encased." A beat. "That's the only opinion I hold about them." She looked at him, and something about the light in that room, warm and quiet, different from the sharp glass and steel energy of the rest of the penthouse, made him look different too. Not softer, exactly, but less armored. "My room," she said, remembering herself. "I should get settled." "Of course." Back to brisk, back to the boardroom inflection. "Dinner at 7, if you want it. You're not obligated." She wanted to say, "We should probably practice being in the same room together if we're going to fool a gala full of billionaires by Friday." She said, "7 sounds good." Her room was beautiful and impersonal, the way rooms in luxury hotels are beautiful and impersonal. It had everything and felt like nothing. She put her books on the nightstand and her succulent on the windowsill and sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel completely overwhelmed. 5 minutes. Then she texted Dana. "I'm fine," she typed. "Everything's great." Then she texted Dana. "Talk soon." Dana responded immediately with 17 question marks and the word Sophia in all capitals, because Dana always knew. Sophia turned her phone face down and looked at her succulent, small, and stubborn on the ledge of a window that overlooked all of Manhattan. "You and me both," she told it. Dinner was quiet. Maria had set the dining table formally. candles, the good china, and then vanished with the tactful discretion of someone who understood that what these two people needed was proximity, not an audience. They sat at opposite ends of a table that could seat 12, and Sophia thought this might be the most physically accurate metaphor for her situation she'd ever encountered. "This is ridiculous," she said. Ethan looked up from the lasagna. "We're at opposite ends of a table that seats 12, she said. Lasagna. "If we're going to be a married couple in front of the Meridian board by Friday, we need to be able to sit next to each other without looking like we've been placed in adjacent cells." Something flickered across his face that was not quite amusement and not quite irritation. "Your point is valid," he said. He picked up his plate and moved to the seat beside her. He sat. He resumed eating. As a concession to intimacy, it was almost comically minimal. But she found herself smiling anyway. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something that isn't in your public profile. Something that would make me sound like I actually know you." He set his fork down, looked at her. "Why?" "Because at the gala, someone is going to ask me something, and I'd rather have a real answer than a scripted one." She looked at him steadily. "What's the first thing you do in the morning?" A pause. "I read the overnight international markets before I get out of bed." "What's the last thing you do before you sleep?" "International markets before I get out." Another pause. Longer. "I check on the server infrastructure for our Asia-Pacific division." A fractional hesitation. "It's not. I'm aware that's not normal." "What do you like?" "Not professionally. Just, what do you actually like?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, silence. Genuine silence, which is almost impossible in this city. "Chess, though I haven't played in years. Old bookshops, the ones with the narrow staircases and the cats." He stopped, as if startled by his own answer. Sophia stared at him. "You like old bookshops with cats," she said. "I'm aware it doesn't fit the profile." She laughed, a genuine laugh, surprised out of her, and something happened in his expression that she had never seen there before. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of where a smile might live. "Your turn," he said. His voice was slightly different. "Tell me something true." She thought for a moment. "I talk to my plants. I've named them." She thought, "The succulent I brought, that's Gerald. I'm a little worried about Gerald in a new environment." "Gerald," he repeated. "He's been through a lot." She met his eyes. "What should I know about your family? Your mother is not part of this." Fast, flat, final. The warmth that had crept into the conversation evaporated as cleanly as if it had never been. She didn't push, but she filed it away, the way she filed everything, carefully, in a place she could return to. "All right," she said. "Tell me about Vermont then, our wedding weekend." And slowly, carefully, like two people learning the steps of a dance that neither had been taught, they began to build the story of their life together. Chapter 4. Playing Husband and Wife. The Metropolitan Museum Gala was everything Sophia had imagined and several things she hadn't. She had borrowed a dress. There had been no time for anything else. But Ethan had apparently anticipated this, because on Friday afternoon, a rack of gowns had arrived at the penthouse from a designer whose name Sophia recognized from the covers of magazines she'd leafed through at nail salons. She'd chosen a deep midnight blue that skimmed her figure and made her feel in a way she wasn't entirely comfortable with, like someone whose life was genuinely this. She was putting on her earrings when he knocked on her door. "We should leave in..." He stopped. She turned. He was in a black tuxedo that made him look, if possible, even more abstractly intimidating than usual. But he wasn't looking at the tuxedo. He was looking at her with an expression so unguarded, just for a fraction of a second, just a flash, that it hit her somewhere below the sternum and stayed there. Then it was gone, and he was composed, and he said, "You look appropriate for the occasion." and he was composed. Appropriate, she repeated. It was a compliment. I know. She picked up her clutch. High praise from you. There was that not quite smile again. Ready? She put her hand on his arm. He glanced down at it. She felt the slight tension that moved through him. Not recoil, but something more like adjustment, like a body recalibrating to unexpected contact. We should practice this now, she said quietly, rather than in front of 200 people. He nodded. And they walked to the elevator, and she kept her hand on his arm, and she told herself that the warmth of his arm beneath her palm was simply a physical fact, and not something she needed to think about further. The gala was a masterclass in performance. Sophia had not given herself enough credit for how good she was at this performance. She'd spent 2 years learning Ethan's patterns. The way he held a drink when he was bored, the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was 3 minutes from ending a conversation, the particular quality of his stillness when something genuinely interested him. She knew him, she realized, in ways she hadn't consciously cataloged. She used every bit of it. She laughed at the right moments. She leaned into him naturally. When one of the Meridian board members, a silver-haired man named Arthur Weston, who had the energy of someone who'd been told he was important since birth, approached with his wife and opened with a pointed, "So this is the mysterious Mrs. Blackwood." Sophia smiled warmly and said, "It's strange how private things become public suddenly, isn't it? We just wanted it to be ours for a little while." She felt Ethan go slightly still beside her. Then his hand moved to the small of her back, and the warmth of it traveled up her spine and stayed. Moved to the small of her back. She has always been like that, Ethan said. And there was something in his voice she'd never heard before. Low, unperformed. She'd rather give something away than make a show of it. Arthur Weston beamed. His wife beamed. Sophia kept her smile fixed and tried not to think about the fact that what Ethan had just said was, in its strange way, exactly true. They were in the car afterward, the city sliding past the tinted windows, when she said, "That went well." It went well. He was looking out his window. The gala's noise and light were already somewhere behind them. "The thing you said to Arthur Weston was accurate," he said. Just that. No elaboration. The silence stretched. Not an uncomfortable silence, she realized. Something else. Ethan. Thank you. For all of this. She turned toward him. I know this isn't what you'd choose either. He turned then, and in the moving shadows of the car, he looked at her for a long moment. Get some rest, he said. He looked at her. We have the Meridian breakfast Monday morning. It was a deflection, and they both knew it. But his hand, she noticed, as they rode the elevator up to the penthouse, remained at the small of her back all the way to the door of her room. He didn't seem to notice he was still doing it. She noticed. Chapter 5. The first crack in his armor. The trip to Chicago happened at the end of the second week. Blackwood Technologies had a satellite office in the Loop, and the Meridian team had requested a site visit. Ethan's private jet was, Sophia was becoming aware, aggressively comfortable in the way that things became when money stopped being a limiting factor and became simply a tool for achieving exact preferences. She sat across from him at the jet's conference table with her laptop open, going over the afternoon schedule, and she watched him working and thought, not for the first time, that the strange thing about Ethan Blackwood was not his coldness. It was that she kept finding exceptions to it. He'd left coffee outside her door 3 mornings in a row. He hadn't mentioned it. Neither had she. He'd noticed, during their second dinner together, that she'd been rubbing her eyes and had said, without looking up from his papers, "There's eye drops in the main bathroom cabinet." And there had been, along with 3 other varieties, as if Maria had been sent to acquire options. He asked about Gerald the succulent every time he came back from a run. Not in words. He would just look at the windowsill. But she'd started giving him a report anyway, and he'd listen without commenting. and she was increasingly convinced he was not listening. "You're staring," he said, without looking up from his screen. "I'm thinking," she said. "Those things often look the same." A pause. "What are you thinking about?" She considered telling him the truth. "What do you think?" She'd been doing that more these past 2 weeks. Small truths, tested truths, the kind that were true but wouldn't break anything. "Your first week," she said, "at Blackwood Technologies. Before you were this." She gestured vaguely at all of him. He looked up. "Why?" "I just wonder who you were before the Empire." Something moved deep in his eyes. Some tidal pull far beneath the surface. A very bad-tempered 23-year-old who slept on an air mattress in a one-bedroom apartment and was convinced everyone around him was one bad decision away from destroying everything he'd built. He returned to his screen. "So, essentially the same, just less well-dressed." She laughed. He didn't, but the corner of his mouth moved. "What made you do it?" she asked. "The tech company. Why that?" "My father," said simply, without the careful blankness he usually deployed around personal territory. "He worked in a factory for 40 years, made almost nothing. Personal territory. Was told for 40 years that the limit of what he could build was the limit of what they'd allow him to touch." His jaw tightened infinitesimally. "I wanted to build something he couldn't be told he wasn't allowed to have." She was quiet for a moment. "Is he..." "He died before the company reached any meaningful scale." A pause that she could feel the edges of. "That's one of the things you don't get to fix." She wanted, with a force that surprised her, to reach across the table and cover his hand with hers. She didn't. Article 12.3 seemed to hover in the air between them like fine print. "He knew," she said instead. "He knew who you were becoming." "That doesn't require a stock price." Ethan looked at her, and the expression on his face was one she'd never seen on him. Open and undefended in a way that seemed almost accidental, like a window left unlatched in a storm. Then the flight attendant appeared with lunch, and the moment closed, and he was composed again. But it had happened. Lunch, and the moment closed. She had seen it. That was the first crack. Chicago confirmed something she'd been circling for days. They were beginning to work together differently. Not just as employer and assistant, the dynamic of 2 years, but as something else. Two people building fluency in a shared language, learning where the weight fell and where to leave space. At the site visit, he introduced her to his Chicago team with a hand at her back that had become so natural she barely registered it until she saw one of the junior developers clock it with wide eyes and lean over to a colleague. At dinner, the head of the Chicago office asked how they'd met, and they told the story they'd rehearsed. "She'd been working for me for 2 years, and then one morning I looked up and I just knew." And Sophia delivered it looking at her wine glass, because looking at Ethan while saying those words had become, privately, a more complicated undertaking than it should have been. Privately, in the hotel after dinner, in the corridor between their rooms, he paused. "You did well today," he said. "You always do." A beat. "I realize I don't tell you that enough." "You don't tell me that at all," she said, keeping her voice light. "No." He held her gaze. "I know." She stood at the threshold of her room and felt the corridor hum with the particular energy of something unsaid. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night." A pause. "Sophia." He stopped, shook his head slightly. "Never mind. Sleep well." She lay in her hotel bed and listened to the Chicago night outside the windows and thought about Article 12.3 for a very long time. Outside the windows and Chapter 6. Jealousy changes everything. The charity gala in the Hamptons was the kind of event that existed to remind people where they stood in the various hierarchies of wealth and beauty. And it was at this event that Sophia first understood that the thing she felt for Ethan Blackwood had moved somewhere that her careful internal management system was not equipped to handle. It started with James Harlow. James Harlow was 32. and he was the philanthropic director of the Harlow Foundation, which meant he had spent his family's money on things that were good for the world and also happened to make him broadly beloved. He had warm eyes and an easy laugh, and he was talking to Sophia near the terrace because Ethan had been pulled away by Marcus to handle something and had said, "Stay here, I'll be back," with a slightly territorial edge that had become familiar. "You're not what I expected," James told her, smiling over his champagne. "What did you expect?" "You," James told her, "something more. Corporate, polished, untouchable." He tilted his head. "You're real. That's rarer than you'd think in this room." Sophia laughed. "Thank you, I think." "Do you enjoy this?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The events, the—" He gestured at the sweeping Hamptons estate, the fairy lights strung over the terrace, the women in gowns that cost more than most people's cars. "I'm learning to," she said, and that was honest enough. "If you ever need someone to complain to about it," James said, and there was warmth in his voice, an invitation that was unmistakably genuine. "I've been attending these since I was 9 and have excellent material." He gave her his card. She took it because it would have been rude not to, and because James Harlow was charming and kind and she was a human being. She was still holding the card when Ethan reappeared at her side. She felt him before she saw him, the shift in the air pressure, the slight realignment of the space around her. The shift in the air. His hand came to her waist immediately, not tentatively, but with a certainty that hadn't been in the movement 3 weeks ago, and he looked at James Harlow with the specific expression of someone who had been handed an itemized bill for an unexpected expense. "Harlow," he said. "Blackwood. Congratulations on the marriage. You're a lucky man." James smiled. Easy, unrattled, the smile of someone with nothing to prove. "Your wife is exceptional." "I know," Ethan said. The words were unremarkable. The tone was not. James Harlow made his excuses smoothly and drifted away, and Sophia looked up at Ethan and said, very quietly, "That was unnecessary." "What was?" "The way you—" She stopped. They were in public. "We'll talk later." His hand remained at her waist. In the car back to the city, she turned to him. "James Harlow is a legitimate philanthropist who runs a foundation that builds schools in 3 countries, she said. Philanthropist who runs a foundation. He gave me his card to talk about charity work, not— "I know what Harlow is," Ethan said. His voice was flat. Then you know there was nothing to react to. He looked out the window. The passing lights caught the angle of his jaw, the tension there. "I wasn't reacting." "Ethan." "It's called maintaining a convincing appearance," he said. "Is that what that was?" Silence. She watched his profile, the careful stillness of a man who is working very hard at something. "I didn't like it," he said, finally. Quiet. Almost against his will. She stared at him. He kept his eyes on the window. The lights of the bridge moved over them. "I'm aware," he continued, "of what that tells you. I'm aware of what the contract says. I'm not—" He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "I'm not acting on anything. I just want you to know that I'm aware." The disclosure was so stiffly formal and so evidently painful for him that it might have been funny in different circumstances. So evidently painful. In these circumstances, she felt her heart turn over. "Okay," she said softly. He nodded once. They didn't speak for the rest of the drive, but his hand, resting on the seat between them, was close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of it. She didn't move away. Neither did he. Chapter 7. The Woman from His Past. Victoria Crane arrived at the Blackwood Technologies investor lunch like a weather system. Beautiful, deliberate, and designed to displace everything in her path. Sophia had seen photographs. The photographs had not fully communicated the impact. Victoria was 40, with the kind of effortless elegance that came from decades of being the most important person in every room she entered. She wore ivory, always ivory, Sophia would later learn. and she looked at Sophia with the careful, assessing warmth of someone taking precise measurements. "So you're the wife," Victoria said. Her smile was perfect. "I've been so curious." "And you're Victoria." It was perfect. Sophia kept her voice warm. "Ethan's mentioned you." This was not true. Ethan had mentioned Victoria approximately in the same way one might mention a structural flaw in a bridge, as a fact to be managed, not a subject to be discussed. Something moved in Victoria's expression at the word mentioned. Approval, almost. "He's not the sentimental sort," Victoria said. "I'm sure he didn't say much." "He said enough." Sophia smiled. It was the most civil confrontation she had ever participated in. Across the room, she could see Ethan watching them with the focused attention of a man who had a well-organized disaster protocol and was currently running through all of its steps simultaneously. Victoria leaned slightly closer. "A word of friendly advice, Sophia. From someone who knows him." Her voice dropped, intimate and deliberate. "Don't let yourself believe you know him. He lets people think they're getting close. Don't let yourself believe. And then he makes a decision, and you realize you never mattered quite as much as you believed." Sophia held her gaze and thought about the coffee outside her door. The eye drops. The way he'd said, "I know," when she told him he never praised her. The crack in the window she'd watched happen over an air mattress and a father who died too soon. "Thank you for the advice," she said pleasantly. Victoria studied her for a moment with something that shifted, slightly and surprisingly, from hostility to something more like genuine appraisal. "You're not what I expected," Victoria said. And then she moved away into the lunch crowd, and the space she left behind felt different, charged and complicated. Later, in the car, Ethan said, "What did she say?" "Nothing you need to worry about." "Sophia, what happened between you two?" she asked. She hadn't planned to ask it. It arrived on its own. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he'd refuse. It arrived on its own. "We were involved for 2 years," he said. "I thought it was a pause that cost him something. I thought we wanted the same things. She was on the Blackwood board when my father's shares were being contested. She voted against me." He said it without dramatics, which made it worse. "I found out after that the whole time she'd been—" He stopped. It confirmed something I already believed, about trust and people and how much faith is worth extending. Sophia thought about Article 12.3, about the man who had built walls and labeled them professionalism. "Not everyone is Victoria," she said. He looked at her. "No," he agreed softly. "I'm learning that." Chapter 8. The Secret That Breaks Her Heart. It was Dana who found out. Sophia had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that this was always the most probable failure point. In the back of her mind, Dana was her best friend of 9 years, and she had, in those 9 years, demonstrated a supernatural ability to detect when Sophia was keeping something from her. This had been a feature of their friendship. In the current context, it became a problem. Dana came to the penthouse, invited for the first time because 6 weeks in, Sophia needed to see her real life somewhere in the architecture of the one she was performing, and she sat on the kitchen counter and watched Sophia making tea, and after 3 minutes, she said, "Okay, tell me." "Tell you what?" "Whatever it is that's happening in your face right now." Dana tilted her head. "You look like someone who's trying very hard not to look like someone who's in love." "Dana!" "With your husband." "He's not—" She stopped. "Oh, sweetie," Dana said. "It's not—" She set down the kettle. She put both hands flat on the counter and looked at them. "It's not supposed to be real." And yet, she admitted, "Supposed to be real." She didn't tell Dana the specifics. She couldn't. But she told her enough. Enough for Dana to sit quietly for a moment and then say, "Does he know?" "He disclosed something?" Sophia said carefully. in the car after the Hamptons gala, but I don't know what it means for him. He has so much scar tissue around this, around all of it. I don't know if what he feels is real or if it's proximity and arrangement, and the only way you'll know, Dana said, is if someone tells the truth. The contract says, Sophia. Dana's voice was gentle. The contract is a document. This is your life. She sat with that for 2 days. This is your... And then she came home late from a solo errand. She'd gone to see her mother, who was scheduled for surgery in 3 weeks, who had cried with relief and held Sophia's face and said, "How did you manage this, my brave girl?" And she came through the penthouse door and the lights were low, and Ethan was on the phone and his voice was clipped and hard, and she heard her own name. She stopped in the foyer. She shouldn't have listened. She listened. The 6 months will be up at the end of next month. The merger closes Friday. Yes, she'll be compensated as agreed. The settlement... A pause. No, it was always the plan. The arrangement ends when the merger closes. That's what the contract... She stopped hearing after that. The words had a physical impact, striking somewhere in her chest and rearranging what they found there. The arrangement ends when the merger closes. Of course it did. That was the contract. That was always the contract. That was the contract. She stood in the foyer of the most beautiful apartment she'd ever lived in, surrounded by the evidence of a borrowed life, and felt the very specific grief of realizing that she had done the thing she'd promised herself she wouldn't. She had forgotten, somewhere in the small kindnesses and the bookshop conversations and the hand at the small of her back, that this was temporary, that she was here for a reason, that the reason was closing Friday. She went to her room quietly. She sat on the bed. On the windowsill, Gerald the succulent was green and stubborn in the Manhattan light. She thought, "You were right to be worried about a new environment, Gerald." She thought, "We can't stay here." He knocked on her door an hour later. She opened it. She had not been crying because she was very practiced at not crying, but her face must have said something anyway because he looked at her with a sudden focused attention. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not?" "Nothing." He stepped into the doorway. "Sophia, I heard your call," she said. Direct. Cleaner that way. "The one where you were talking about the arrangement ending Friday." He was still. "I know that's what the contract says," she continued, her voice level. "I know that's what we agreed. I just..." She stopped. "Tell the truth or don't." Dana's voice. "I'd forgotten. I'd let myself forget what this was, and that's on me, not on you." "Sophia, I'll start looking for an apartment Monday," she said. "I can be out by..." "Stop." His voice was sharp. She stopped. He moved into the room, and there was something in his face that she'd never seen there before. Something raw and unmanaged, the look of a man whose careful architecture was losing an argument with something he hadn't built for. "That call was to the board. They were asking about the post-merger arrangement, and I was..." He pressed his mouth together. "I was reciting what the contract says because I didn't know how to say anything else. I was reciting what the..." She looked at him. "I don't want the arrangement to end Friday," he said. Each word like something lifted and placed. "I don't want you to go. I don't know how to..." He stopped, tried again. "I have not been in the habit of allowing things. People, I have not..." His jaw tightened. "Victoria taught me that what I believed was real was a strategy. I decided, after that I was done believing things were real that might not be." He looked at her. "But you are the most real thing I've encountered in a very long time, and I don't know what to do with that. I only know that the thought of you packing your books on Friday is..." He stopped. He looked away. In the whole 2 years she had worked for him, and the 6 weeks she had lived with him, she had never heard him struggle like this. Ethan Blackwood was articulate and precise and controlled in all things. He was none of those things right now. "Ethan," she said softly. He looked back at her. Ethan, I put Gerald on the windowsill the first night, she said, because I wanted to make sure he'd get enough light. She held his gaze. I wasn't planning on staying. I was making sure he'd survive. A pause. But then I started being okay here. More than okay. She took a careful breath. I don't want to go either. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. Thicker, warmer, tipping towards something. He crossed the distance between them and cupped her face in both hands, and she felt his thumbs trace her cheekbones, and he looked at her with an expression that had no armor in it whatsoever. I need to know, he said. Before anything else, I need to know that what you feel is that it's not the contract, not the arrangement. It's so far from the contract, she said, that the contract is basically a different story. Far from the contract, something broke open in his expression, relief and something deeper, the look of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. He pressed his forehead to hers. Just that. They stood there in the low light with Manhattan below them and Gerald stubbornly green on the windowsill, and she closed her eyes and thought, oh, this was always going where it was always going. Then he pulled back. Because of course he did. Because Ethan Blackwood had not maintained a $12 billion empire without an instinct for timing, and this, she was beginning to understand, was his version of caution. I think, he said carefully, that we should probably tear up the contract. I think we probably should, she agreed. Before Friday. Before Friday. He nodded once. Then, as if he'd just thought of something, he looked back at her. For the record, he said, you look considerably better than appropriate in evening wear. She blinked. Considerably better than. Then she laughed, startled and real, and his expression softened with the warmth of a man who had recently discovered what it felt like to make someone laugh and had decided to pursue it as a primary objective. But then something shifted. Something came into his face that she hadn't expected. There's something I have to tell you, he said, about how this started. Chapter 9. Goodbye, Ethan. He told her in the library. It seemed, somehow, like the right room for things that needed to be said without adornment. They sat, not far apart, not at opposite ends of anything, and he turned his glass in his hands for a moment before he spoke. Marcus found your personnel file 6 weeks before I made the proposal, he said. He was running background checks on all senior staff, standard procedure before the Meridian deal. He found the financial information and flagged it to me. A pause. I saw it before I came to you with the proposal. I knew about your mother. I saw it about the medical costs, about the eviction notice. She was still. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was watching him. I want to be honest with you, he said. I chose you because you were the person in my life I trusted most. That was true then, and it's true now. But I also knew. He stopped. I knew that what I was asking would be very difficult to refuse, given your situation. And I used that. Deliberately. He held her gaze. I'm not proud of it. The room was quiet. Outside the library windows, the city moved in its perpetual motion, indifferent. Sophia thought about the morning of the proposal, the eviction notice in her bag, the number he'd named, and the way she'd kept her face still. You could have just given me the money, she said. You could have given me a raise or a bonus. I could have. He didn't look away. I told myself you'd never accept it without conditions. I told myself it was an equitable arrangement. Never accept it without conditions. A pause, and she heard something in it that cost him. I think I also wanted an excuse for you to stay. I'm aware of how that sounds. She was quiet for a long time. You could have told me, she said. When it stopped being just an arrangement. You could have. I know. The two words carried the weight of everything unsaid in the months before them. And you waited until now to tell me? Yes. She stood. She needed to move. She walked to the shelf of books and put her hand on a spine and stood with her back to him for a moment, feeling the shape of what he'd just given her. Truth, undefended, at the cost of everything it might cost. This was what she'd always wanted from him. This exact vulnerability, this specific honesty, and it had arrived mixed with something that hurt. "I need time to think," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Of course, she heard him stand. "Sophia, please," she said quietly. "Not right now." He left. "Please," she said. She stood in the library with her hand on a book she wasn't reading, in a room built by a man who believed books should be read and not encased, and she felt the full, complicated weight of what it meant to fall in love with someone who was still learning how. She did not pack. She told herself she was deciding, but she moved through the next day and the day after like someone underwater, careful, slow, attentive to every detail. She ate breakfast while he worked in his office with the door open, neither of them pretending the usual equilibrium. She sat with Gerald in the afternoon sun. On the second evening, her mother called. "The surgery's confirmed for Tuesday," Ellen said, her voice bright and careful in the way it had been since the day she'd been diagnosed, the voice of a woman who had decided not to let her daughter see the full weight of what she was carrying. "The surgeon says it went very well for the last 2 patients she performed it on. She seems very confident. Very well for the last 2. That's wonderful, Mom." "Sophia." Her mother's voice changed. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" "I'm fine." "You've been saying that since you were 7 years old, and you never mean it." A pause, full of the gentle patience of someone who had known her completely for 29 years. "Who is he?" Sophia closed her eyes. "Mom." "A mother knows." "He's complicated," she said. "He did something that it came from a good place, I think, but it also came from a place that wasn't. He made a choice for me. He knew something about my life that I hadn't told him, and he used it, even though what he built from it was—" She stopped. "Even though what he built from it was good and real. At least I think it's real." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Your father," Ellen said, "was the most imperfect man who ever tried to love me. He made every mistake, Sophia. Every single one. Tried to love me. But he made them because he was desperately trying and desperately afraid, which is, I promise you, different from not caring." A pause. "The question isn't whether he made mistakes, it's whether he's capable of learning from them." "He told me the truth," Sophia said. "He didn't have to. Nothing was forcing him to." "That," her mother said gently, "is the answer to your question." She found him on the roof terrace, late when the city was at its most beautiful, the lights strewn below like fallen stars, the air cool with the first edge of autumn. He was standing at the railing, hands loose at his sides, looking out at Manhattan with the particular quality of stillness that she now recognized as the version of him that wasn't performing anything. She stood beside him. "I'm not leaving," she said. He turned. In the low light, his face was open in the way it only ever was when no one was watching. Except she was always watching, and he had, she thought, known that for a while now. He was always watching. "I'm not leaving," she said again, "because you told me the truth when you didn't have to, and because I don't think what started as a calculation stayed one, and because—" She took a breath. "Because you leave coffee outside my door, Ethan." People who are only calculating do not leave coffee outside people's doors at 6 in the morning. Something moved through his expression, like light moving through water. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "You should have." "I was afraid." The word came out stripped bare. "I was afraid that if you knew I'd chosen you partly because you needed it, you'd stop believing that I—" He stopped, tried again. "That I see you. Not the arrangement, you." "I know," she said quietly. "I believe you." He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face, a gesture so careful and unhurried that it landed completely differently than all the practice touches of the past weeks. This was not performance, not positioning, touches of the past week. This was just him, and just her, 42 floors above the city they both lived in. "What happens now?" he said. "With the contract is already irrelevant," she said. "What I want to know is what happens without it." He looked at her. Gray eyes, no armor, the man who liked old bookshops and silence and had built an empire to honor a factory worker father who never saw it finished. "I'd like to try," he said. I'd like to try being someone worth staying for." "Ethan?" She shook her head slightly. "You already are." He kissed her then. Tentative at first, almost questioning, as if he were still not certain he was allowed. Then she leaned into it, and he exhaled like a man setting something down that he'd been carrying too long, and they stood on the roof of the world with the city below them, and autumn coming in cool across the terrace. World with the city below them. Chapter 10. Fake Marriage, Real Love. The Meridian merger closed on a Thursday, on a bright October morning that smelled of cold air and turned leaves, in a boardroom on the 32nd floor of a midtown skyscraper where Ethan shook hands with the Meridian CEO, and the assembled board members applauded, and somewhere in the city's vast, indifferent machinery, a $12 billion future clicked into place. Sophia watched from a seat along the wall. Her usual position, assistant's distance, observer's perspective. And when the room broke into conversations, and the photographers came in and the celebration began, Ethan turned from the cluster of people around him and looked directly at her across the room. He didn't smile. He almost never smiled in professional settings, and she had learned not to look for it. He almost never smiled. What he did was hold her gaze, steady and clear and unhidden, in the middle of a room full of people watching him. And she felt it like a hand reaching across the distance. She smiled for both of them. Later, Marcus found her in the corridor. "He wants to see you in his office," Marcus said, and then added with the warmth of a man who had been watching all of this unfold and was frankly delighted by it. "Just so you know, we all knew, since about week 2. "That's embarrassing," she said. "It was beautiful," Marcus said firmly. "Go upstairs." Ethan's office was empty, except for him, standing at the window. Of course, the window. With his jacket off and his hands in his pockets and the late morning light making him look, for once, like someone who wasn't in the middle of something urgent. "The merger closed," she said from the doorway. "It did. The contract technically expired at close of business yesterday." "It did." He turned. "I called Helena this morning. Yesterday. The settlement is being transferred today. Full amount, plus an additional amount for the surgery costs and a trust for ongoing care." He paused. "That's unconditional. That doesn't change based on anything else. I want to be clear about that." Her throat tightened. "Ethan?" "I also called the building manager," he said, "and told him to cancel the sublease arrangement on your old apartment because you moved out of it 2 months ago and have been paying for an apartment no one is living in, which is—" He stopped. "I handled it. You'll get the deposits back." "You handled my apartment lease." "I handle things. Yes, I handle things." A pause. "I also—" He reached into his jacket pocket and produced something small and set it on the desk between them. Her old apartment key. And beside it, a new one. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "Not under contract. Not for the merger. You to stay," he said. "I'd like you to stay because the penthouse is incomprehensibly quiet without you and Gerald, and because I've apparently developed a habit of leaving coffee outside your door at 6 in the morning, and I'd like to continue doing that if you'll allow it." He held her gaze with the directness that was, she'd learned, his version of openness. "I'd like to continue being in the same room as you, Sophia. Indefinitely, if that's something you want." She looked at the key on the desk. She thought about $14 in her checking account and a broken umbrella and a coffee stain on a white blouse. and the morning her life changed. She thought about 47 pages and a potted succulent and an apartment full of borrowed beauty. She thought about a man who built walls and labeled them professionalism, who left coffee outside doors and asked about succulent well-being, and said, "I know," when she told him he never gave her credit, and who had stood in a library and told her a truth that could have cost him everything, because telling the truth was the thing she deserved. She picked up the key. "I want that," she said. He crossed the room and stood in front of her, and she watched him make what she was beginning to recognize as his specific decision, the one where he chose not to hold back, not to maintain the careful distance, but to simply be where he was. He put his hands on her face, and he kissed her in his office at Blackwood Technologies with the Manhattan skyline behind him, and the merger closed and the contract dissolved, and nothing between them but the real and complicated and completely genuine fact of what they had built, somehow, in 6 months of pretending. "I love you," he said against her temple. Pretending. The words were rusty, effortful, like something being used for the first time in too long. "I want you to know that it's not the arrangement. It's you. It has been you, I think, for a long time, before I was willing to admit what that was." She pressed her face to his collar and felt the solid realness of him, the warmth and the heartbeat and the man underneath all the glass and steel, and thought that the distance between fake and real was, in the end, just the distance between fear and honesty. "I love you too," she said. "I love you in spite of Article 12.3. She felt him laugh, a real laugh, the one she'd been collecting like rare coins, and his arms tightened around her. "We should burn Article 12.3, he said. Agreed. 3 months later, Ellen Bennett's surgery was deemed a complete success. 3 months later, on the first Saturday in January, she walked from her bedroom to the kitchen without her cane for the first time in 2 years, and she stood there in the morning light and cried, and Sophia, who had driven to Hoboken to be there, cried with her. Ethan was there too. He stood slightly to the side in the way he had when he wasn't sure of the protocols, the posture of a man who was very good at boardrooms and still learning kitchens, and Ellen looked at him over Sophia's shoulder with clear eyes and said, "Thank you for taking care of her." And Ethan said very quietly, "She takes care of herself. I'm just trying to keep up." Ellen decided she liked him. Gerald, the succulent, had been moved to a spot on the roof terrace where the morning light was better. He was thriving. The spot on the roof terrace. Sophia had told Ethan this with appropriate gravity, and he had responded with what she was now comfortable identifying as Ethan's expression of genuine delight, which looked, to an uninformed observer, like neutral attentiveness and looked, to her, like sunshine. The pretend marriage became a real one, not with fanfare or elaborate ceremony, but with a conversation on the roof terrace on a quiet February evening when Ethan said, "I'd like to not have to explain to people anymore why you live here." And Sophia said, "That is genuinely the least romantic marriage proposal in recorded history." And Ethan said, "Would it help if I got down on one knee?" And she said, it would help. So he did, on the cold terrace with the city below them, and no ring yet, because that hadn't been planned. And he said, "Sophia Bennett, I would very much like for this to be real. Officially. Permanently." And she said yes before he finished the sentence. Permanently. The ring came 3 days later. Not the largest one, not the most impressive, but the one she'd paused at in the window of an estate jewelry shop in the West Village during a walk they'd taken the previous autumn. He'd said nothing at the time. He'd been paying attention. He was always paying attention. She understood now that this was how he loved, in observation and remembering, in coffee outside doors and keys on desks and trips to look at rings she'd glanced at in passing. Quietly. Precisely. With the thoroughness of a man who had decided that if he was going to do this, he was going to do it completely. She wore it the way you wear something irreplaceable. Carefully. Joyfully. aware every day of its weight on her hand, which meant you are known and chosen and not alone. They still sometimes ate at a table that could seat 12, but they always sat next to each other now. At a table that could seat, and sometimes, in the library, in the afternoon quiet, he would read in his chair, and she would read in hers, and Gerald would be green on the windowsill, and the city would move beyond the glass, and there was nothing to perform, and nothing to prove, and nothing to pretend. Just two people, in a room full of books, in the real and luminous life they had accidentally built while building something else entirely. The best love stories, Sophia thought, weren't the ones that went according to plan. They were the ones where the plan turned out to be completely beside the point. The end. Fake Wife. Real Feelings by Joan Savage. For every woman who ever told herself, "I'm fine," when she wasn't, and for the love that teaches us we don't have to pretend anymore,